The wind in the high basin of Colorado did not simply blow. It carved the land like a knife. It carried the cold of the tall white mountains and the dust of 1,000 empty miles. Winter here did not wait kindly at the door. It crashed in, trapping the whole valley between the dark timberline and the rough little town of Blackwood. Blackwood clung to the earth like it feared the wind might tear it loose. A few muddy streets, 3 saloons, a church that looked surprised to exist at all, and scattered homesteads holding on against loneliness and cold. To the west, the land rose into thick pine and deep shadows. That was where Elias Ward rode, alone, his horse Banjo moving slow beneath him. Elias was a worn man, 35, but carrying the weight of many more years. His canvas duster was stiff with dirt and old rain. His gray eyes were sharp but tired, the eyes of a man who had seen too much. He had once been a scout in the war, able to read the land like a map, and now he drifted from job to job, taking work from railroad men who paid badly and cared even less. His side burned as he rode. A week earlier, a dispute over a survey line had turned violent. Elias had stepped in front of a bullet meant for another man, one who didn't bother to thank him. The wound was infected now, hot under his ribs, sending waves of pain through his body. He knew the signs, and they were all bad. He needed water. He needed fire. And he needed to stay unseen. The Blackwood and the outlaws around it were not safe for a wounded drifter. He guided Banjo up a narrow trail. Fever blurred his vision. For a moment, the gray rocks became gray uniforms, and he was back on a battlefield in Virginia. Smoke, blood, young boys dying. Orders that made no sense. Officers arguing over maps drawn by men who had never seen the land they sent soldiers to die on. Elias shook the visions away. The war was long over, but its ghosts never left him. As the trail opened into a small hidden meadow, a stream cut through the center, dark and fast. Shelter, water, a place to rest. He slid off the saddle and nearly fell, grabbing the leather to keep himself upright. "Just need a fire," he muttered. He stripped the saddle off Banjo, then began gathering wood. His hands were clumsy, shaking from fever. He built a small fire near the cliff wall and lit it. Orange light flickered over the rocks. The heat felt good. Too good. Yet his fever made him reckless. He decided he had to wash the wound. He pulled off his duster. His shirt stuck to his skin with dried blood and pus. He peeled it away, gritting his teeth. Then his boots, his trousers, his thin underclothes. Soon he stood naked in the freezing wind, his skin covered in scars, a lifetime of battle and hardship written across his body. He stepped into the stream. The water hit him like a hammer of ice. He gasped, scrubbing at the wound with shaking hands. Yet he washed his clothes and spread them on rocks near the fire. Shivering violently, he wrapped himself in his thin wool blanket and lay close to the flames. The fever pulled him under like a tide. He muttered to ghosts only he could see. His breath grew shallow. His body shook, then went still. He did not hear the soft crunch of footsteps on snow above him. High on the ridge, Willa Cain had smelled smoke long before she saw it. She moved like part of the forest, quiet, sharp-eyed, cautious. 24 years old, dressed in patched buckskin and men's trousers, her dark hair tied back with a leather strip. A Winchester rifle rested easily in her arm. The people of Blackwood called her names: Wild Girl, Savage, Witch. They whispered stories about her, but the truth was simpler. She had survived things the town refused to see. She followed the scent down the slope, stepping silently between the pines. She reached the meadow and froze at the edge of the firelight. What a man lay there, completely naked, sprawled on the cold ground, steam rising from his fevered skin. His clothes were stiff with ice near the fire. His chest rose in uneven, jagged breaths. He muttered something she couldn't understand. Willa's eyes narrowed. She scanned the area. One horse, no second rider, no camp gear. Not an outlaw camp. Not a trap. Just one man, dying in the snow. She stepped closer, rifle ready. His body was scarred everywhere. Old bullet wounds, knife marks, burn marks, and the fresh wound, swollen and angry, oozing infection. Fool, she thought, stripping down in this cold. He's as good as dead. She turned away. She should leave him. She lived by a strict rule: never help strangers. Strangers had burned her world once. Strangers had taken everything from her. But then she saw the canteen stamped USA soldier once, a man beaten by life, not one who beat others. She let out a long breath. Damn it! In 2 steps she was kneeling beside him, and she touched his forehead, burning hot. Fever would kill him before morning. She shook him hard. Wake up! He mumbled something about holding the line. Not tonight, she said. She pulled a heavy buffalo robe from her pack and threw it over him. She gathered his clothes, his gun belt, his gear. She saddled her horse, then hauled Elias to his feet with surprising strength. This is going to hurt, she warned. He groaned, barely conscious. She dragged him to her horse, slung him over the saddle, tied him so he wouldn't fall, and began leading both horses up the hidden trail toward her cabin. The climb was brutal. Twice she nearly fell. 3 times his weight almost pulled her down. But Willa Cain did not stop. An hour later, she shoved open the wooden door of her cabin and dragged Elias inside. She dropped him on her bed, a frame of pine poles covered with furs, and lit the lantern. The small room glowed with warm light. She stoked the fire, boiled water. He cleaned his wound, applied salve, and wrapped his ribs tight. He thrashed, lost in fever, forcing her to tie his wrists gently to the bed frame to stop him ripping the stitches. Finally, he lay still, breathing easier. Willa stood over him, arms crossed. You lay down in the snow to die, she whispered. I couldn't let the mountain take you. She sat beside him, rifle across her knees, and watched through the long, cold night as the storm. Inside the cabin, a one truth filled the air. She had claimed him, claimed his life, and now she would fight to keep him alive. Elias woke to a gray, cold light he didn't recognize. For a moment he thought he was dead. The ceiling above him was rough timber, not sky. The air was warm. A fire popped softly somewhere close. When he tried to move, pain flared in his side. His hands wouldn't move. His wrists were tied to a wooden bed frame with soft cloth strips. Panic snapped through him. What his breath came fast and harsh. He jerked his arms hard, the motion tearing at the wound in his ribs. A sharp cry escaped him. Stop that! The voice wasn't a man's voice. It was low, steady, and absolutely in control. Elias turned his head. A woman stood at the foot of the bed, outlined against the lantern light. Her buckskin coat was patched, her dark hair pulled back in a wild knot. A Winchester rifle rested easily in her arm. You tear those stitches, she said. And I am not sewing you up again. Elias swallowed. His throat felt like sandpaper. Where are my clothes? He croaked. Drying by the stove, she said. I washed them. And my gun? Where I put it? She didn't blink. You're in no shape to use it. Elias tested the bindings again. They were firm but soft, tied by someone who knew how to restrain without hurting. "Untie me," he said, trying to sound like the soldier he once was. "When you behave," she replied. "You were fighting ghosts in your sleep. You tried to claw open your own side. I tied you so you wouldn't kill yourself." Elias let out a shaky breath. He lay back, staring at the ceiling. "You brought me here," he said quietly. "I found you naked in the snow," she said. "You were cooking from fever. Anybody else would have left you there." "Why didn't you?" Willa Cain didn't answer for a long moment. "Because sometimes the land takes enough," she said finally. "I wasn't going to let it take you too." She cut the bindings with her knife and stepped back fast, giving him space. Elias sat up slowly, holding the furs around him. He studied her face. Sharp cheekbones, sun-browned skin, dark eyes that watched everything. Would he knew her name? He'd heard whispers. The wild girl who lived alone in the mountains. "You're Willa Cain," he said. "People in town talk too much," she muttered, turning away. He watched her move, quick, efficient, always alert. She checked the door latch twice, stirred a pot on the stove, wiped down her knife in a single practiced motion. She was a survivor. He recognized the look in her eyes because he'd carried the same haunted look himself. Days passed. Snow piled high outside. Elias healed, slowly, and Willa kept distance until the storm hit. The blizzard slammed into the cabin like a beast clawing at the walls. Elias was finally strong enough to stand, but the cold inside the cabin was brutal. Willa kept the fire going, brought in wood, cooked, mended gear, working like she didn't know how to stop. Elias hated sitting useless. One afternoon, she reached for a heavy water bucket, and he stepped in. "Let me," he said. "Sit down," she snapped. "You're waiting on me like a servant." Willa's eyes flashed. "I am not your servant. This is not your cabin. My house, my rules. You rip those stitches and you bleed to death. I'm not burying you in frozen ground." Her voice shook with anger, but not fear. Elias stepped back. Right then, he understood. She didn't fear him. She feared losing the one safe place she had left. That night, the cold inside the cabin grew deadly. Elias lay on the floor, teeth rattling. His breath fogged in the air. Get up," Willa said suddenly from the bed. "I'm fine. You're shaking the whole room. Get in the bed." "It isn't proper. We're not in a parlor ward. If you freeze to death, I'm the one digging the hole. Get in the bed." He obeyed. The bed was narrow. They lay back to back, not touching. The silence was thick. Elias could feel her warmth behind him. Hours passed. He woke later with his back pressed lightly to hers. Warm. Safe. Human warmth after years of cold nights on the trail. But Willa didn't move away. And something shifted. Night after night, the cold forced them close. The space between them shrank. Accidental touches became shared warmth. Shared warmth became comfort. And comfort became something neither had words for. One night, wrapped in furs, the storm howling outside, Willa whispered in the dark, "I'm tired, Elias." "Of what?" "Of fighting the whole world alone." He didn't move, didn't push, didn't reach for her. He just listened, and that's when she told him the truth. Her parents weren't killed by renegade Utes. It wasn't a raid. It wasn't a tragedy of the wild. It was a man named Harland Pike, a cattle baron who wanted their land. His riders killed her family, burned their cabin, and buried the truth. Willa's voice shook, but she didn't cry. "I survived," she said, "and that was my crime." Elias didn't speak for a long time. Then he reached out and covered her hand gently. "You're not alone anymore," he said. At their fingers intertwined, a fragile peace settled between them. Something real. Something dangerous. Days later, when they rode into town for supplies, the truth of Willa's past and the threat of Pike came crashing back. Insults, cruel stares, a shopkeeper trying to cheat her, and Harland Pike himself stepping out of the shadows, smiling like a wolf. Elias stood at Willa's side. He backed her, protected her, and with one small act, he put both their lives in danger. Willa knew it. And when they left town, her voice broke. "You made him see me," she whispered, "and now he'll come for us both." She wasn't wrong. Danger was already climbing the mountain. The attack came at dawn. Elias woke to Banjo's nervous snorting outside the cabin. The fire inside was low, only embers glowing. Willa was already sitting up, her rifle in her hands, her eyes sharp. "You hear that?" she whispered. Elias didn't answer. He was listening too. A faint creak in the snow, not a breath of wind that wasn't wind, the soft jingle of a bridle. Willa's jaw tightened. "They're here." Elias rose and pulled on his clothes, his side still sore but strong enough to fight. He checked his revolver. Loaded. Clean. "How many?" he asked. "3 for sure," she said. "Maybe more." Harland Pike never did anything halfway. Elias moved to the window. Through the frost, he saw shadows forming near the trees. Men with rifles. Men who had burned Willa's whole life down and ridden away unharmed. Willa was pulling ammo from a wooden box when Elias stepped behind her. "You stay behind me," he said. "No," she said. "This is my fight." "It was," he said quietly. "Now it's ours." A silence fell between them, brief, heavy, full of the truth they had been circling for days. Willa nodded once. Not agreement. Trust. Outside, the first shout rang out. "Cain! We know you're in there! The Pike wants you alive!" Willa's face hardened. "He wants me dead," she whispered. "He just wants to do it himself." Elias scanned the room. One window, one door. A cabin built for storms, not gunfights. "They'll set the place on fire," he said. "I know." She grabbed a second rifle and tossed it to him. "You good with a long gun?" "I'm good with anything that shoots." The cabin walls shook as a bullet punched through the doorframe. Another shattered a jar on the shelf. Willa crouched low, the eyes bright, fierce and unbroken. "I'm ending this," she said. "And I'm with you," Elias replied. They moved as one. Willa kicked open the back hatch, a narrow wooden door she had built for escaping bears, not men. Snow blasted inside. She slid out on her stomach and disappeared behind a fallen pine. Elias followed. The cold hit him like a fist, but adrenaline pushed him forward. He took cover behind a stack of logs. Pike's men thought they were still inside. Perfect. Willa fired first. One shot. Clean. Precise. The man near the shed dropped without a sound. Elias followed her lead, firing 2 shots at the riders pushing toward the front door. One fell. The other scrambled for cover. They were turning the fight around, until Harland Pike himself stepped into the clearing. He was bigger than Elias had imagined. Thick mustache, long coat, silver buttons. A man who believed the world should give him whatever he reached for. His pistol gleamed in the half-light, and his eyes scanned the tree line. "Willa!" he roared. "Come out and die proper!" Willa stood slowly from behind the pine, rifle raised. Snowflakes clung to her hair. Her breath steamed in the morning air. "You murdered my family!" she called out. "You burned our land! You killed them and blamed the Utes!" Pike's lip curled, not in shame, but in amusement. "They didn't know their place," he said, "and neither do you." Elias felt the words hit her like a blow. Willa cocked her rifle. "This is for my mother." Pike's pistol swung up, fast. Too fast. Elias didn't think. He moved. He ran from behind the logs, putting himself between Willa and Pike, just as the shot rang out. Pain tore through his shoulder, spinning him sideways. He crashed into the snow. "Elias!" Willa screamed. She fired. Her bullet struck Pike square in the chest. The cattle baron staggered, disbelief in his eyes. No man had ever stood against him. No woman had ever beaten him. And he fell face first into the snow. Silence swept across the clearing. The last rider fled, disappearing into the trees. Willa dropped to her knees beside Elias, her hands shaking as she pressed against his wound. "Why did you do that?" she cried. "Why would you step in front of me?" Elias tried to speak, but pain locked his jaw. Willa's eyes filled with tears she had held back for years. "You're not allowed to die," she whispered fiercely. "Not after I found you. Not after I saved you. Not after you." Her breath caught. She lowered her forehead to his. "You came back for me," she said softly. "Nobody ever came back for me." Elias lifted his hand, weak but steady, and touched her cheek. "I'm not leaving you," he said. Her tears fell onto his skin, warm in the cold morning snow. Hours later, after the wound was bandaged and the danger passed, they sat together inside the cabin. The fire glowed bright. The storm had quieted. And for the first time in years, Willa's hands were not shaking. Elias looked at her, really looked, and said the words that had been growing quietly between them. "I want a place to belong, and I want it here. With you." Willa's voice was soft as she answered. "You already do." Outside, the mountains stood silent and wild, but inside the cabin, two broken lives had finally found warmth again. Not saved by chance, not saved by luck, saved by each other.